Hi, and welcome to the Comics Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club for the month of May 2020. We're still in full Corona lockdown. That's why my beard is getting longer and longer, and I'm starting to look really scary and hairy, more than usual at least. We've got a fantastic book this month. Our book is the wonderful When Stars Are Scattered. By Victoria Jamieson and Omar Mohammed. We're very, very lucky to have Victoria here with us today. There's Victoria. Hello, how are you?
Hi, how are you?
Excellent. Well, at least as excellent as one can be when we're still under partial lockdown. Omar was not able to make it because Omar is blessed enough to have a new baby as of yesterday. And so while we're going to miss him very much, all of our best to him and his family. That's just fantastic to have a new baby in the house.
Yeah, I saw a picture. She's adorable.
Yeah, sweet.
Yeah, little girl.
That's great. That's awesome. This is the second time that Victoria has been with us here. Last time she was here in person. Now we're in her house. Hi, Victoria's house too.
Hi.
And hi. We'll do the same. We're gonna. You know, you've answered some of this before, but since some people are watching this probably the first time, didn't watch the first show, my first question always is, why comics? Of all the things that one could be doing in the world, what is it about comics? And maybe what specifically is about comics for a book like this for you?
Right. Well, why comics in general? I think it's just, I think I sort of fell into it by accident. I never read a lot of comics as kids. As a kid, I read Calvin and Hobbes and like the Sunday comics. Those were about the only comics I really had any experience with. So I loved those, but I never thought about doing it myself. I was a big reader. And when I went to art school, I thought I wanted to be at first an animator for Disney because I lived in Florida. And eventually I learned about illustration and I thought, well, this is a way I could just tell my own stories. So I loved illustration as a way to tell stories and kind of be able to do everything, like to write the story and to do the drawings. So my first books were picture books. This one isn't mine, but you know, bigger books for younger kids where I could really use art and words together. And I just love using words and pictures together. I think it's so expressive. You can do so much with it. And my first graphic novel was Roller Girl. And I thought it was just a great way to tell a story for older kids, and I could still use pictures and write words. And I really fell into it by reading Raina Telgemeier. I think because I worked in publishing and traditional book publishing, she was kind of my entry point into graphic novels for kids. So I just love it. I love making graphic novels. And so when it came time to make When Stars Are Scattered, it wasn't really a question because I think in pictures so much that I couldn't imagine writing a straight novel. And for me, this book was a good candidate for it anyway, because a lot of things as American, I didn't know what they looked like. So Omar would tell me about, you know, where he lived, and I didn't know what a tent would look like. You know, when I picture a tent in my head, it's like a tent that I'd buy at the sporting goods store. I didn't know tents were, you know, made out of bent sticks and covered with tarps. So I thought it was a good way to show kids what life was like, since it's so different from life in America.
Yeah, no, and it very much is from the book. Your previous two books, your previous two graphic novels, the other one's All's Fair, which was what you were here for last time, All's Fair in middle school, were autobiographical. This one is not. Can you talk about the differences in doing autobiography versus doing somebody else's story? Are there differences?
Yeah, I would say so. For my other books, here's All's Fair. They were based on my own life in some ways, but I was free to make up details. And with this book, I was not free to make up details. I couldn't. It was untrue to the story if I tried to make up details. So it was harder in some ways, but easier in others. I'd never worked with someone else before as a co-author. And everything that I wrote, I had to make sure, it actually happened that way, or that Omar was okay if I was making small changes. And every time I tried to steer the story in a direction by myself, it was always a complete failure. So I had to always be checking with Omar. And it was a little hard at first just because I'm used to working by myself, but it really taught me, I think, the importance of listening to stories rather than just charging ahead with the story that I have. When I talked to Omar and listened to what he was telling me, it just made everything so much stronger.
Yeah. How much of this was because in the back notes it says that he had originally started writing treatment for adults as a as a novel, I guess. So how much of it was written out for you, and how much of it was just him talking to you and you guys listening to one another? Yeah,
there wasn't too much written out, actually. He had several pages of an adult memoir, but most of the way we wrote the story was that I would go to his offices. We both live in Pennsylvania. He lives in Lancaster. So I'd go to his place of work usually. He had two full-time jobs most of the time. So we'd find lunch breaks or some time to make it work. And I'd go and then we'd talk for about an hour and a half and I would just take notes. And then I would go home and type it up and send it to him and make sure it looked okay. And then come back for the next chapter. So that's sort of how we wrote it.
Interesting. Were you doing any art at that point for it, or just strictly text?
Well, I could show you. See which one's one of the first ones. When I went to visit, it was often both at once. So I would take really scribbly, messy notes, and I'd also be sketching at the same time. That's usually how I work. Even as I'm a pretty visual person, so I just, he told me a story about goats, I would start drawing goats. It was sort of taking notes in both ways.
Interesting. Wow. That's very cool.
Yeah, it's not very efficient. Because I take these notes and then I go home and I'd be like, what did I write down? So there's a lot of back and forth where I'd call Ilmar and be like, what was the name of your town again? What was the name of your school? So it wasn't the most straightforward way to write it, but
it works. Anything that works, right?
Yeah.
Anything that works. Hey, I want to remind our viewers out there, if you have any questions for Victoria, if you have anything you want to ask about the book, we're very happy to have you ask those questions, and we'll get them answered, right? While we wait for stuff to come in. How much research did you have to do for a project like this, and how much of it existed in a way that you could access?
Well, I guess my research started with talking to Omar, I guess. I'd started doing a little research before that. The way I kind of got involved with the story was I'd been volunteering with an organization in Portland, Oregon, that helped find refugees to the U.S., find apartments and, get settled to the U.S. So I was starting to learn a little bit just by going to orientation meetings. And I was paired with a woman from Somalia and her 4-year-old daughter. So I just sort of showed them how to ride the bus and how to go to the centers they needed to go to. So doing that kind of introduced me, especially to refugees and immigrants who were coming here. I didn't know that much about life in the refugee camps. So that was something I really had to learn about. So I learned a lot about that from Omar's stories. And then I did my own research on top of that, of course, which was books, documentaries. And there are a few based on Dadaab, where Omar grew up. So I had a few research to look at. So yeah, I tried definitely to supplement what Omar was telling me with my own research, just so I had as much understanding as I could.
What got you involved with the refugee aids to begin with?
It was, well, I first started thinking about it in 2016, I guess. And that's when the news was just filled with stories of Syrian refugees. And it just seemed so distant and so far away. And I didn't I didn't know anything about it. So it's really just a way to inform myself and to wonder if there's anything I could do to get involved. I didn't realize that, yes, there's actually a ton you can do locally, even though Syria and other countries are far away, Dadaab's far away, but there's a lot you can do locally because people are, the woman I was paired with in Portland lived 4 blocks away from me. I wasn't aware that people were coming to our country and just being resettled all around us. And there's lots you can do to help get people, used to the United States. Actually, one of our recent conversations, a kid asked Omar how long it took him to get used to the United States. And he's like, I'm still getting used to the United States. He's been here for, I think, 13 years. So it's a big transition. So there's a lot you can do. Donations, food, clothing to new arrivals.
Is there a central organization that does this, or is it local community based?
It's usually local community based. There's some bigger nationwide organizations that usually have branches in different cities. The one I worked with in Portland was called Catholic Charities. Omar works for an organization called Church World Service. There's also a Jewish organization that helps it. There's usually, I think a lot of them are religious organizations, and then they have chapters in different states and cities.
Okay. So are there interdenominational ones as well?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Not sure.
I didn't mean to grill you on it. I'm curious. And, I think people at home, maybe also if they want to participate, like the kinds of things that they as well.
And you don't need to be.
Good. Go ahead.
Yeah. You don't need to be, I went to Catholic Charities and I was raised Catholic, but I haven't been Catholic for a while. I think my mom was like, yes, she's coming back. But, you can be any religion. You don't have to be, Christian to work with Christian services. I think if you want to help, anyone is free to help.
Sure. Yeah. No, I was thinking of it, in terms of to acclimate people, showing them how to write, showing them how things work. That seems anybody can do that. I mean, you need a little pre-training, obviously, but
not that much.
Yeah, it's like a great way for people to. So,
I'm sorry, your mic's cutting out a little bit, but I heard most of that.
Sorry, I'll get closer. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better. And actually, one of the first things I did that required no training, I don't know if right now you could do this, but one of the first things I did was I just went to the airport to greet arriving families. We just would bring signs, and my son was only about 1.5 years at that age, so it was a nice thing we could volunteer with together. We would just go to the airport, hang out, bring signs, and cheer as families came.
Yeah. Are you still doing this during COVID?
No. And when I moved to Pennsylvania about 3 years ago, I was looking to start volunteering again, but this book has kind of took over.
Well understood. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it's a good way to it's as equally valuable. One of the things that I like about this book, and what I like about comics journalism generally, is that it brings me to a place, and it puts me in that place in a way that documentaries, while I learn things from documentaries, I never feel like I'm there. I always feel like I'm at a distance, and the intimacy between the reader and the authors in comics, the way that we control time while you control layout, things like that, it just really involves me deeply in the story, and I really was deeply involved in Omar's life here. As an author, I don't know how to phrase this question. It's is it hard to maintain? Not maintain is not the right way to say it. I don't know exactly what I'm asking, other than sort of selling somebody else's world. When you're doing autobio, right? It's you know what is in your head. You have it. I just wonder if there's a difference for you in terms of what the audience is going to receive. Not for you as a creator, but your awareness of what the audience is getting. I bobbled that question horribly.
Let's see. I don't know if this is going to answer your question exactly. But one of the hard parts of writing such an intimate story as an author was that sometimes I felt weird about asking really personal questions about some of the hardest parts of Omar's life, especially because in the beginning we didn't know each other that well. We had just met. And I was coming to his office once a week and like, asking about the worst periods of his life. So that was kind of hard to get used to. I think I'm very fortunate that Omar was very warm and receptive and welcoming and never made me feel weird about asking personal questions. It's also part of his job. So he works at a center that welcomes refugees and helps them get resettled. But a lot of his work is outreach. He'll go to schools and local universities and talk about his life as a refugee. And I think that's part of the reason he's talked about wanting to write this book as well, that just telling his story was so important. So that made it easier for me to feel comfortable around him. He made me feel very comfortable.
Was there any learning curve or trepidation with him in doing it in comics? Because I assume that he hadn't seen very many comics in a refugee camp.
Yeah. And so I brought, the first time we met, or maybe the second time we met, I brought my books and showed him, what they were like. Yeah, I think it was an introduction for him for sure. He has kids, so he's has been around children's books. We talked about doing a picture book as well, like a combination graphic novel and picture book to come out at the same time. But through talks with our editor was involved from the very beginning. We sort of decided that this was the right format and the right age range for kids to kind of have a glimpse into the life of a refugee.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel that way as an adult, certainly. And I think it's going to work really well, great for the kids too. One of the things that happens in most comics, right, is that characters tend to wear the same uniform all the time, right? A uniform, right? Like Charlie Brown, clothes never changes, and you never really think about that, right? But in here, everybody's wearing the same clothes, but that's because of that they're in a refugee camp, and they can't change clothes very often, at least. Was this a concern for you at all in terms of communicating which character is which?
I think it actually made it easier for me in that sense. When I write books that are based in current times, that's one of my biggest issues because I have no fashion sense. So I'm always like, oh, what's my character going to wear? So it actually made it easier that the characters wore the same clothes. So there are 3 separate sections in the book. The main section, the first section, Omar is around 11, 12. So he's wearing this shirt. I did want to make sure in each section that they're wearing the same color. So Omar is the older brother, Hassan is his younger brother. So Omar's always wearing sort of a red themed shirt. Hassan's always wearing a blue color. So that was one way I wanted to differentiate the two boys. And I also should mention, since we're talking about color, we had a fantastic colorist named Iman Getty, who's based out of Atlanta. And she did so much, a lot of the work in this book, there's lots of patterns that are in the clothing. So a lot of her work was going through and adding like tons and tons of different patterns to the clothing. So she did such a fantastic job with that.
Yeah, that must be interesting too, because in a way she has to play Where's Waldo, right? To find the character consistently through the book, I
eventually learned to label. To be like,
okay.
Here's Omar.
And how did you get introduced to her?
To Iman?
Yeah.
We really wanted to find a Somali American colorist. So it took a long time, actually. I reached out to several universities, art colleges around the country. And I think I eventually just found her on Twitter. If you look at her website, she's got amazing, amazing design work. She's working with me on my next graphic novel. She's just a joy to work with. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. That's so just out of the blue, you found that's a very interesting. I've never heard that before. I like that. I like that. We have a question from, you can put it up, Karen Halstead. Hi there. We love your books and stories. You working on something new during quarantine times?
Oh, well, thank you. I am. It's still top secret, but I was already working on it when I was finishing up the work for When Stars Are Scattered. So it kind of already been percolating in my brain. Right now I'm working on the sketches for it. And I feel very, very fortunate actually that I have this to work on, because it's been, I love making stories, and it just brings me joy to have a new story to work on during weird times. So yeah, I'm really excited about the next one. It's fun. It's very different from this. And I think I wanted that because this was it got to be kind of a dark story at times. So yeah. The next book is very light and fun.
Fiction, nonfiction?
Fiction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pure fiction.
Yeah, pure fiction. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Is not that I should ask this now, because if we have you back for that book as well, but are there different muscles you're using doing fiction versus nonfiction?
Yes. And this one's actually, so it's a retelling of a pretty well-known story. So that was very interesting too. Yeah, well, I'll have to come back for the next one because there was a lot I had to learn with this new project.
Neat. You're still just starting it though, so we're talking a year or so away.
Yeah, I think it's I'm supposed to start final art maybe by July or August.
Okay.
Knock wood.
Yeah. So knock wood. Next summer, maybe. No, probably next fall, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your output? Page a day, faster, more?
Ooh. Let's see. Well, I can kind of show you. So when I do my final arts, the final stage of sketches looks something like this. So that's really like the final. When I'm doing sketches like this, I don't really have a certain number of pages I can do a day, just as many as I can. But after everything's approved and it's time to do the final art, and I'm doing the final art, usually I think I would do about 2 a day. But it was pretty
easy.
It was pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Are you let's talk about that process a little bit. Are you doing everything pen and paper, or are you doing it? Yeah, okay. Are you taking that sketch, which is very detailed for a sketch, honestly? Are you taking that sketch and like light boxing it, or are you just having it off to the side and redrawing it freehand?
So yeah, my sketches are pretty detailed, and that's especially for this book, because I needed to make sure the details were correct with Omar and with our beta readers. We had a lot of beta readers for this book. So I do try and get my sketches pretty tight, just because that means fewer corrections with the final art. So actually I don't use a light box. What I do is I scribble on the back with a blue pencil,
okay,
like just a color like that. And then I place it on my paper and I tape it. And then I press down really hard with a pencil, okay, which sort of it's a very light transfer, even lighter than that, which is nice because it's there and I know it's in the right place, but it's not perfect. So I can still have a little freedom when I'm using my brush and pen.
Yeah. When you say you press down with your pencil, you mean you're tracing it with the pencil essentially? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just wanted to make sure I understood the step there. Looks like we have another question. No, I thought you were pointing to, sorry. You do your own lettering as well?
Well, so for the lettering like this, it's actually a font that I made out of my handwriting.
Okay.
Yeah, that kind of blows my mind how people letter by hand, because there's so many text changes and like typos and punctuation changes from copy editing. So it's a font, and that way my designer at the publisher can then go through and make the changes in the design document. Yeah. I do work pretty closely with my designer. So I used to be a book designer. So I usually do this in InDesign, and I'll send him the files. So we can kind of share them back and forth. But having it as a font definitely makes it easier on both of us.
Yeah. And what about the onomatopoeia that's in panel 3? An onomatopoeia, by the way, is a word that describes the idea that it's trying to do, like bang, or in that case, flash. Just for the kids at home, onomatopoeia. It's one of my favorite words in the world.
It's a good word.
It's a great word. So that's hand lettered, though, obviously.
Yes. So I did do some hand lettering. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And so if this were to get translated, and I would assume this is going to get translated in many languages because it's that kind of a book, would someone go through and redo that onomatopoeia in the native language, or would it stay in English?
That's a good question. I don't know. I should check I've got Roller Girl in different languages up there. I should check and see what they did in all of them.
Yeah. Always something to be curious about how comics work.
Good question.
Places. Yeah. Cool. Right. And then you said that you were making notes in the later half of the book for Iman coloring. Her palette's really, really nice in this. Lot of brown and a lot of blue and but it doesn't look lifeless. That's the amazing thing. And because sometimes, when you use those kinds of colors, it really flattens out the artwork. How did you give her notes towards that to begin with, or did she just have that completely in hand?
Well, she did a few samples along with another colorist, and yeah, she just blew it out of the park on her own. And that was one of the big challenges of making this book, was that everything is brown. It's in the middle of the desert. So how do you make that interesting and not repetitive? Yeah. So that's why it's really key to have her on board, because she did such a fantastic job. I think that was part of the problem. Not part of the problem, but one of the challenges with writing the book too. Not only did everything look the same, they never leave, it's always the same colors, the same place. But a big part of what Omar told me of living in the refugee camp was that every day is the same. And that was kind of the worst part as a kid, that there's nothing, it's just waiting. You're just waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. So I think Iman did a great job with the colors and making that interesting. And then my job was to make the waiting interesting.
Yeah. Do you think that you'd be able to survive in an atmosphere like this? I mean, I know that I can't. So let me answer that first before you feel like you're being put on the spot. I can't imagine if something happened here and we had to go to a refugee camp as depicted here, where people are literally there, it looks like their entire lives. I mean, the camp's still open today. Mm-hmm. I just checked. It's still there all these years later. And I can't even imagine.
Yeah, and people have generations of families live there. People are born there, live their whole lives there. They have children who live their whole lives there. And in terms of if I could do it, Omar didn't expect to. I really wish he were here today to talk about his story, but he often talks about how he was a middle-class family. His father was a farmer. His mom was a businesswoman in the market. They didn't need anything. And it's not like you plan to be a refugee. It's you don't say hey kids, we're going to leave tomorrow. It's no, you leave now because there's someone with a gun. You have to just run. So I can't imagine it, but millions and millions of people do it. So I'm sure that you and I, if we were forced to run out of our houses now, that's what you have to do. That's just how you do it. When they fled from Somalia, Omar was 4 and Hassan was around 3 or 2. And that I had a hard time imagining, especially because when I was writing the book and doing the art for the book, my son was about 4. And just looking at him and imagining him by himself at 4 years old, that's the part that kind of blew my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, on one level, it's almost easier because our lives, we've formed our idea of what our lives are. I mean, even watching during COVID, how people can't deal with this change in their life. And this is an easy change. This is a trivial change compared to the experience that Omar and thousands and thousands of Somalian refugees are facing. Yeah, it boggles my mind. And I've been intellectually aware of these things, but seeing it here and living it through a life makes a really big difference in how you understand something like this.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason, not the only reason, but part of the reason we wanted to write this book in 3 parts. Because Omar would say that, yeah, when he was young, he didn't know any different. I mean, sure, he had some memories from Somalia, but his main concern every day was, I want to play soccer. I want to play with my friends, and how they would make toys and the games they would play. So in the second section of the book, when Omar is around 13, 14, he said as he got older, then he started to realize, wait a second, not everyone lives this way. There's another life out there, especially if he saw people around him getting resettled to different countries. And so, yeah, he said it was kind of a growing awareness of, oh, this isn't everyone's life. This is just my life.
Yeah. We have another question on the thing. So let's put that one up. From BV74353. That's not your real name. Hi, great job. Could you answer a question I have about Omar? In real life, did his brother Hassan not talk?
Yeah, no, his brother's nonverbal. I've never met Hassan, actually. But yeah, I've seen some videos, and no, he doesn't talk.
Yeah, but he certainly can do things, so he's not helpless.
Right.
In the later part, you talk about he's been raising their kids, or helping raise the kids.
Yeah. So yeah, he's definitely not helpless. And Omar would talk about how they would often just be able to look at each other and kind of understand, because they spent all of their time together when they were very young. So, Omar was resettled to Arizona with Hassan. They came together. And then when Omar's wife came over, they resettled to Pennsylvania, where her family lives. And Hassan was living with them and helping them raise their kids. Right now, Hassan and 5 of Omar's kids are actually back in Africa with his mother, spending some time with her.
Oh, that's very nice. That's very nice. Yeah, I'm the part of the story that was actually the part that I almost didn't believe, was that they got back in touch with their mother at the end. That to me is so. It makes me feel so much better for that. Like that. Yeah, they were able to put their family back together in some fashion. She's still in the refugee camp, but at least they have that satisfaction to know that she's there, and that they know that she's relatively safe, at least. Yeah, that's great. That's the best part of the story.
Yeah, me too.
Were there parts that you enjoyed telling better than others? Components to it?
Sure. I think I remember having a fun time the day Omar talked about the games that they would play in the refugee camp, and how they would make soccer balls out of like garbage bags. So yeah, just the day-to-day, like lighter moments, and kind of the love he felt from, say, a foster mom, Fatima, who took care of them. There is definitely a lot of love that came through in the story, which was helpful, because there are dark parts of the story too, but the lighter parts were definitely kind of a beacon that I had to put in the book.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is very much a hopeful book all the way through. Fatuma is particularly, everything will be okay. We'll all get there in the end. I mean, that is good that he had that in his life, and it's good that that's a message all the way through. Were there parts that made you uncomfortable or feel bad to draw?
Yeah, parts of the story that we kind of had to work together to add to the story, because it was, Omar's life was mostly him and his brother, but we did want to add some bits to the story of how life is different for girls in refugee camps, because life is harder for girls. So often they aren't as able to go to school. They have more obstacles to getting an education. So yeah, those parts were tricky because I personally wanted to be really careful and be just kind of observant of cultural differences, but just be honest. So Omar again I would never have made this book without him, because we kind of worked together to make sure we were presenting things honestly and truthfully as much as we could.
No, absolutely. I mean, one of the things it's not quite subtext, but the one girl who is essentially sold, and she loses her chance to go to America because she's sold for a wedding, and that's part of their culture. I understand, but it was hard for me to read.
Yeah, and that was something we actually had. Anyway, as I mentioned before, we had a lot of beta readers for this book, and one of our beta readers really pushed us to add more nuance to that, because yes, sometimes girls are married off at a young age, but in the story, I made a point to say she's 15, because it's not, it's not that often that girls are married off much younger than that. And families are in impossible situations there. So in the story, the girl, Mariam, her family has a bunch of younger siblings that they also have to take care of. So I did try to hold back any judgment I might have, because I've never been in such an impossible situation where if I have, kids who are hungry and I can't feed them, like there's no good answer to that. So if you can find a nice man who will take care of one of the kids, like who am I to say,
Sure. No, I mean, even in this country, probably 150 years ago, that was still a normal thing, the idea of a dowry. But it's to our modern sensibility as Americans, it's like, oh my God, that's a very disturbing thing.
Yeah, and that's something I think that I came across in a lot of the documentaries I watched and talking to Omar, that it was such a culture shock for the refugees coming to a refugee camp run by the UN, where they had their own rural lives before. Many of the people who came to the camps were farmers and lived in very rural settings. And they come to a camp run by the United Nations, and all of a sudden there's all these rules that they have to follow that's completely like a shock to the way they've lived their whole lives. So a lot of people are kind of learning this too. So it's a lot for everyone to deal with.
Yeah, and certainly some people fall into despair over that. The best friend's father, I don't remember if he's named or not, but certainly has become bitter because of that experience. Yeah,
and talking to Omar again, I feel kind of bad, speaking in his place, but because you can't really work in a refugee camp, that a lot of the adults who are used to providing for their family, there's nothing you can do. So what do you do if your kids are crying from hunger and you can't work, you can't support your family? So that's what I guess what I mean by it's impossible situations that you just survive.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I was saying earlier. If I was thrown into that kind of a situation, I just feel like my American privilege would just go, no. I want to give everybody one more reminder that if you have any questions at all, we're happy to ask them. We're going to wrap up relatively soon, so if you've got those questions, go ahead and put them into the stream. Yeah. I mean, a lot of my questions are really for Omar more than you. I don't want to ask you secondhand questions. How do you do this? It's really fascinating. Here's one you might be able to go. So you were talking about or he was talking about the soccer balls being made out of plastic bags. So what did they do? Did they take sort of a succession of plastic bags and wrap them inside of one another? And then wrap them up tightly?
I think so. He did say that they would fall apart pretty easily.
Yeah.
One of the game I liked the most when he told me about it, and that's another one I put in the book, was where they use a sandal as essentially like a coin toss. So like you throw a sandal in the air, and if it lands, face up or face down, it says who gets to run. He said a lot of the games were just running.
Yeah.
And I think things have changed. One of the challenges in making this book was that Omar left Dadaab in 2009. And a lot of the images I was looking at to do the art were from more recent years. And more people have come since he left. So now I think there are somewhat more resources, because you'll see pictures of kids with soccer balls and like soccer uniforms. And the markets have really been built up since he left. So you see like a movie theater and a gym. So yeah, that was one of the challenges, making sure it was true to when he was there as opposed to what Dadaab is like now, because it's really gone through a lot of changes.
Yeah. It's still going to be very hard.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got another question from Beer. Yeah, Jay Beer, the first one. That one. Yeah. Jay Beer, what do you use to make your art?
Well, I'm in my studio since we're all like stuck at home now.
Yeah.
So I've got, for this book, I use brush and ink. So I use black sumi ink and a paintbrush. And I often will do detail work with pens. I don't know if sometimes I use a brush pen and just pencils. I really love these woodless pencils, because who needs wood?
Yeah.
So yeah, nothing really very fancy. I like to show that. I visit a lot of schools, or I used to visit a lot of schools. Hopefully I will again, but I like to show people that I don't use special equipment. I do have a Wacom tablet, and Iman did the coloring digitally, of course, and I do some of the final touching up of the work digitally, but most of what I do is just by hand, just because that's what I like to do.
Yeah. You have an easel or
no, just a drawing desk, drawing table.
You're drawing at an angle, or are you drawing relatively flat?
It's at a very slight angle. Let's see if I can show you.
See?
Very slight.
There you go. Yeah, very slight. Yeah. Do you I'm always curious about this. Do you hunch over the board? Does it do you like get back and arm aches from drawing? Because it's a very intense, very physical thing to do.
Yeah, I sure do. I hunch a lot. I realize, because now that I've started doing sketches for the past, say, month and a half, I've noticed that I've got aches in my neck because I just hunched over like this.
Yeah. Jay, if you have another follow-up question that you want to ask anything specific more about that, please ask it. We got one more here, and back to BV. Did Omar stay in touch with Mariam? Did she get relocated? That was actually an interesting question. I wanted to ask Omar as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So Nemo and Mariam are the two girl characters in the book, and they're both kind of compilations or of different people he was friends with. So
they're not specific people.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Nemo is more based on someone specific, and she has been. I think she's in Nebraska, but I think the person he associates most with Mariam is still back in Dadaab.
Okay. And the one who's in Nebraska now, was she relocated to Canada? Is that originally?
No, that one we kind of made up
because
there is a big scholarship program, or at least there was, to Canada, not so much the US. So Canada is available for students.
Interesting. Jay Beer's back with put it up. Why did you decide to make books? Why did you decide to make books?
Yeah. I think it's mostly because I like to draw so much, and I just love drawing characters. And so it eventually just sort of happened that I wanted to draw like a pig in the Olympics. So eventually I wrote a story about a pig in the Olympics just so I could draw it. So I think it was my love of drawing and of art that made me want to write books, specifically so I didn't have to wait for someone to write a manuscript for me, that I could just write my own story in order for me to draw it.
Yeah. So let me ask you, though, about the difference between doing children's, the illustrated books, which tend to be 32-ish or so pages long, versus doing this. I mean, that's a massive difference. And this is a massive undertaking.
Yeah, I know. I almost wish I could go back to writing picture books, but I actually find picture books so hard to make because they are 32 pages, and the people who do them well are so masterful at telling like really immersive stories in 32 pages. It's so hard. So in some ways, I do feel it's easier to make graphic novels because you have a bit more space.
Yeah.
It just takes a lot of time.
Yeah. Do you have any? Do you ever get ideas days for something that's less than 150, 200 pages, but not big enough for a book?
Not big enough for a whole graphic novel.
Well, yeah. I mean, so like if you come up with a 40-page story, like what can you do with that these days?
Well, I do have 2 graphic novels that are shorter. They're about 64 pages, called The Great Pet Escape. Actually, hold on. I'll go reach it. So I think, and this is something I hear from parents and teachers, that graphic novels for younger readers are something they're always looking for. So these were ones I did kind of in between Roller Girl and All's Fair, where it's a shorter story, it's a lighter story of classroom pets. So I think there's room in the middle.
Okay, very good. Yeah, on my side of things, it looks to me like most people are either little comics or giant books, and that middle stage it's not working. It's not selling a lot of copies.
Yeah,
but I have a different concern than you do. So.
No, we probably have the same concerns because these don't sell as well. Yeah. But for the people who reach out to me, have said that they're really glad there's something in the middle. But most of my stories just end up being longer and for slightly older kids, just naturally.
Yeah, absolutely. BV again. Where was Omar's mother? Where is Omar's mother? Still in the camp, yes? Yeah.
So much of the book is the boys wondering about their mother. When they left Somalia, as Omar has said in our previous talks, like, you just leave. So Omar and Hassan just had to leave with their neighbors. Their mother was in the market. So they were just separated for years and years and years. She had thought the boys had died. So after they were relocated to the US, she came to Dadaab and met Fatima and learned that they were still alive. They were in the US. So she's still back in Dadaab.
Yeah. So during those 17 years, what was she doing?
Well, do you know? I think she'd been in other refugee camps. And like, she was just under the impression that they weren't alive anymore. So she wasn't really searching. Yeah.
No, I didn't mean that as a criticism of her. It was more of the, wow, that's a long time before you finally find your kids. Yeah. And
I think it was very hard on her. Like, I can't really speak about that, but I know Omar has said he's glad he has a chance for his kids to get to know her now, because like, she missed out on that with her 2 boys. So the fact that she can spend time with her grandchildren now, as he's said, is a real blessing to him.
Yeah. But they've got to go there because, unfortunately, our current administration has said that anyone from that country, no matter what the circumstances, can't come.
Yeah. I mean, they're working on it. I think there are some loopholes available. So, fingers always crossed. Who knows what will happen in the future? And I think Omar has said that, even living in a refugee camp, like, you never know what tomorrow will bring. So just try and be prepared.
Yeah. Is there a great hope that these policies are going to change immediately among the refugee community if the administration changes?
I have no idea.
Is there a fear that this is just the way it's going to be from now on?
Gosh, I don't know.
Yeah. I wish Omar was here. I would ask him. That was one of the questions I wanted to ask him. All right. Jay Beer again. How do you stay focused when you work?
That's tough when I'm writing, because I find writing so difficult on my brain. It's very taxing. So it helps that I have set working hours. I work from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And if I waste those hours, then that's kind of on me. I don't have much spare time because I have a little kid. So my work hours are precious to me. When it comes to drawing, that's not really a problem, because I look forward to the drawing. I can't wait to get back to drawing. So that part I don't need help with. It's the writing that I take lots of breaks and I go for walks. But it's just hard, and I guess you can't force yourself to do things. I don't know. I need to I think about it all the time, but I also give myself a little slack too, because it's hard work.
Yeah. Would you agree with the notion that much of writing is rewriting?
Yes, yes. And a lot of writing for me is daydreaming.
Yeah.
Like I do a lot of my writing when I'm like lying in bed and doodling, which doesn't really feel like writing. I'm just daydreaming.
And then when you get to the art part, then you're not having to second and third guess yourself. You've got a really solid idea of where the story is.
Yeah, I do some technical rethinking. That maybe feels more like rewriting because I'll draw a scene and then I'll think, well, is this the best way to show it? Maybe I should pull out more, or maybe I should zoom in on this part. So that's really just fiddling with things, but I definitely have the scene in my brain. It's just like I'm deciding where to place the camera and trying different shots.
Yeah. And when you do that, are you redrawing the entire page, or are you just redrawing the panel and pasting it over?
I usually just redraw the panels. And a lot of my sketches, actually I didn't show this one, a lot of my sketches are very, very loose thumbnails. Mm-hmm. So I go through a lot of these type of things where I'm trying different scenarios and very loose, so it's not like I'm redrawing, you know, like the Sistine Chapel or something. Yeah,
very much so. BV again wants to know, how did you find Omar? Meet, probably.
Yeah, well, I was looking to start volunteering when I moved to Pennsylvania. So I went to Omar's place of work, which is called Church World Service in Lancaster. And I was just sort of taking a tour through the building, speaking with one of his coworkers, and I was mentioning that I'm a graphic novelist. And she introduced me to Omar. She's like, Omar's working on this story. You should talk. So we sat down to talk, and then voila, we wrote a book together.
Yeah, that's really cool. That doesn't, like, that happens very often. Like, you just
I'm very, very lucky and very fortunate.
Yeah. No, and it's a powerful story, and it's a beautiful story. And I really hope that that this does very well, and that this gets out to all the people that it needs to, because I think it's really important for kids, especially, to get this kind of understanding of the world around them, and how people's lives are different in different places. And I really want to thank you, Victoria, for taking on a project like this, for a beautiful book like this, and telling a story so wonderfully. Thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm thankful I got to do it. I'm thankful Omar invited me kind of into his life and his family and his story. So I'm very thankful for that. And I should say, since a big part of the story is about Omar's faith, Eid Mubarak to everyone who celebrates today's Eid. So that's another reason I assumed Omar wouldn't be able to make it today, but the birth of his daughter also.
Absolutely. Let's leave this with, there's a lot of budding young cartoonists out there. There are a lot of people who are interested in graphic novels. What would be the one tip or suggestion that you would give today for someone thinking about making this their career?
I would say the biggest thing for me was not being a perfectionist. I was pretty nervous starting my first graphic novel because I didn't have much of a background in it. And I really just had to tell myself, the book's not going to be perfect. So if you're writing a story now or drawing your story now, don't stress if it's not as great as the ones you see on the shelf. Like, it doesn't matter if it's not perfect. Just do the best job you can telling the story from your heart, and your books will get better, and they'll get better, and they'll get better. But just tell the story you want to tell.
That's excellent. That's excellent. All right. Well, if any of you sitting at home want a good book, want to learn about the world around you, want to know more about refugees, what their lives may be like, and just want to read a really beautiful story about hope in a really hopeless place, I thoroughly recommend When Stars Are Scattered. Certainly, if you wanted to, you could buy it at our web store, but you have a comic shop near you, probably. Just don't buy them from Amazon. Don't do that. Don't buy books from Amazon. But buy from a local bookstore around you, and get this book. We do these conversations with authors every month, and we'd love to have you as a member of the clubs. I want to thank especially Victoria for being here and being our guest today. I want to thank Jordan Willocks for doing our backstage. I want to thank our sponsors at The Beat, right there, down below. Great comic site. And I want to thank all of you members for being a part of this, for reading these books, for getting excited about great comics. Thank you, Victoria, again, so much for participating.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see everybody next month with next month's book. I have it. It's a great book. It's a fantastic book. Superman Smash. Whoops, I should put it that way. There we go. Superman Smashes the Klan by Gene Yang, who's a fantastic author. And he's going to be here, not live in person because obviously we're all still under lockdown. But Gene's going to be talking to us next month about this book. So look forward to it next month. Until then, thank you. Read more comics.